And I am still talking about Joseph, but I'm going to talk about a subject that sort of covers a few of the chapters rather than a particular chapter. So I want you to turn, if you've got Bibles, to 1 Peter 5, because that's actually going to be one of the focuses today. And that's last week's PowerPoint there, Mike. I found my perfect man. Yeah. No, not this morning. No, because that Mark would have sent that. Anyway, I'll keep going, and we'll see what the screen looks like in a minute. So the whole subject today is I'm going to talk about humility and basically looking at Joseph's journey of humility. And so that's the basic. That's why I've chosen to talk from 1 Peter 5. And it's just looking at the three sets of dreams that Joseph has and looking at how each time he dreams, things change. In the past, I've struggled slightly with what humility is. It seemed to me to be pretending you're not good at something when you really are. That's what I felt it was. You know, you're really good, but you're saying, oh, no, sorry, no, it's not me, it's the Lord, and all this sort of thing. And so that's what, in my head, humility was for quite a while. It did help at Bible college. Barney Coombs, who led the Bible college, led Salt and Light for a while, he said, you know, if you do something well and someone comes up and says, oh, you're really good, then just say thank you. And then when you get home, you say thank you to God, because God enables you, God gives you these things. So that also helped a bit. But actually, C.S. Lewis, for me, has the greatest definition of what humility is. I just find it helpful. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking about yourself less. And, you know, it's quite nice when it rolls off the tongue as well, isn't it? But that's a good definition for me. And this is what happens with Joseph. As he goes through life, he starts thinking about himself less. So let's just read 1 Peter. If you could click that on for me, Mike, sorry. It did then. Starting at verse 5, in the same way, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. All of you, clothe yourself with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, for he cares for you. And the word humble here, it's an action word. Humble yourselves. It's not you're born humble or you're not born humble. This is something that we all do. You humble yourselves. But it's not just that. It's a two-way thing, because it says, humble yourselves under God's mighty hand. And so it's like this two-way thing. Yes, we are humbling ourselves, but under God's mighty hand, he also can be pruning us sometimes. And so Joseph humbled himself, but he was also humbled under God's mighty hand. And I felt that he was a brilliant example of what clothing ourselves with humility is. And as I said, you can see his journey through his three dreams. So the first one is, Joseph is the center of the universe. Peter says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So in chapter 37, which we've already covered, we see that Joseph is the center of his world. He's the center, and he thinks he's the most important, and he has two amazing dreams to prove that. One, the sheaves of wheat, there's all the 11 sheaves of wheat, which are his brothers, and they bow down to his sheaf of wheat. He's the center of his family. He's the most important one. And the second, a dream possibly of all 17-year-olds, he's the center of the universe. The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars are bowing down to him. And the brothers and his father are really upset at his arrogance, but he's so full of self-importance, he doesn't notice what those around him were feeling. And many of us, I'm sure, when we're younger, we can remember times where we've been showing off. It's sort of part of growing up. You begin to learn you're not the center of the universe. And we can all probably remember those times. Back in the 90s, in fact, just my last year when we were here at this church before, I was asked to run a big bookshop at a big camp. I ran the bookshop here, which was a very little bookshop, and somehow that gifted me to run a big shop in theory, but I had no idea what I was doing. And I felt really inadequate doing the whole thing. And this is the honest truth. I ordered the books based on whether I liked the cover or not. And any I liked the cover of, I ordered 10 of. It was just, and I had 4 shops, and it was just this massive project. And I just felt rubbish about it. But then when we finished the camp, it was very exhausting. When we finished the camp, I must have been chatting to somebody who was on a sort of rival camp, a different church camp. And apparently we had taken more money in our bookshop than they had taken in their bookshop. And this made me feel really good. Having thought I was rubbish, I was now queen of bookshop runners. And what an accolade, eh? Anyway, so off we go. When we left Henley, we went off to Bible college. Off we go to Bible college, and the guy who runs Salt and Light, the big boss guy, is doing a lecture or certainly with us. And he makes a comment on the bookshops. And I said, oh, yes. I said, and, we made more money than they did at that camp. And he said in front of all the students, are you showing off, Jo? It really knocked me down a peg. It put me in my place, and I'll remember it forever, because that's basically what I was doing. I was just showing off. I am the centre of bookshop managers. The opposite to this sort of pride is humility, and there's actually a very small choice between the two of them. What I should have done when someone came to me and said, wow, you took more money than they did, I should have said thank you to them and gone home and thanked God for helping me, because I couldn't have done it without him. And I was praying all the way through that God would help me, and yet I took all the glory myself at the end. That's what I should have done. It's such a small choice between pride and humility. It's such a small step. And Joseph, at this time, took the wrong step as well. God wanted to give Joseph hope. He made sure everybody knew that God was saying he's the most important person in the universe. And so Joseph, probably like me as well, but I didn't have it as bad as Joseph. Joseph is about to learn the hard way what humility is. And he's about to learn that the humility is one of the big keys to successful Christian living. So he then starts a journey from the center to the edge. 1 Peter 5 says, young men, in the same way be submissive to those who are older. All of you, clothe yourself with humility towards one another. So Joseph's been sold by his brothers as a slave, and now he's also a slave in prison. There's basically no choice but to be submissive to those who are in authority. Joseph is learning the hard way that he's not the center of the world, that actually those he's serving are much more important than him. And in this dreadful situation, he is learning to put God more at the center. He must have asked for help. He must have asked for humility. He must have asked for for God to help him, because we see it says that God shows favor to the humble. And then we see in Genesis 39, I think I've got these up here, Joseph found favor in Potiphar's house and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household and entrusted to his care everything he owned. And then in verse 41, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. God is giving him favor. God says he opposes the proud, but he gives favor to the humble. His humility enabled him to be a slave with honor, to be a slave with purpose, and to be a slave with hope for a better future. So the word clothe yourself, it actually comes from a Greek word that, shall I try and say it? I did this on, you can do things on the internet. Enkombumihe. How's that for a word? Enkombumihe. It isn't just get dressed. It is to tie an apron round your waist and tie it in a sort of knot. And if you had an apron on like this with a special tied knot, then you were a slave. If you just had an apron without a different tied knot, you were a freed man. And actually the way this was tied identified you as a slave. And any apron or white scarf tied in this manner distinguished you. And when Jesus washed the disciples' feet, he tied the towel around his waist. He was setting a physical example of what it was to be a servant of all, as well as a practical example. Jesus was showing us this is how we make it in the Christian life. We become a slave to all. We tie the apron around our waist. Every time Joseph did this, you can just imagine him saying, life's not fair, but I'm putting this apron on today. Life's not fair, but I'm going to have a good attitude today. Life's not fair, but I'm going to do those jobs that no one else wants to do. I'm going to go the extra mile. And not long before Jesus was washing the disciples' feet, there was also this story about the disciples arguing. And Jesus is saying, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be a servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So Peter, who was arguing for greatness, is now writing this letter. He now knows that as Christians, we have to put the apron on daily, not just physically, although that it sometimes means physically, but around our hearts, put the apron on so that we can be identified. That's how Christians, the mark of Christians, people that are prepared to put the apron on. And sometimes because it's a good picture, I will imagine myself doing it just to try and help me if I've not got such a good attitude towards someone, or if I don't want to do something. I just imagine myself doing that. Perhaps if I'm walking to work, I find it helpful. But for many years, Joseph is putting this apron on. He's keeping his heart soft. He's keeping the right attitude because the Lord is showing him favor. And humility comes when you learn to do what is right when it feels wrong. When you keep going when you want to give up. When you love people when they've hurt you and upset you. When you stay but you want to run away. When you resist sexual sin when you're lonely. All these things Joseph did. That's what humility is. That's what walking humbly is. And the amazing favour of God that was available to Joseph is also available to you and I when we choose to do those things that we don't really want to do. And sometimes we actually have to decide that we're going to do it on purpose in order to sort an attitude out with us. I may have said this before actually, but I remember I worked in a sales office back in the day, and they were mainly blokes in the office, and nobody would make the tea and coffee. They all waited for me to make the tea and coffee, and I used to get a real anger inside me. And I didn't want, because whoever made it first, of course, had to make the whole office tea and coffee. And I didn't want to leave the office for sort of 20 minutes, sort of, well, what do you want? What do you want? How many sugars do you want? I mean, today it would be even worse, wouldn't it? Because you'd have to go through all the milk specialities and all the rest of it. But at least it was just milk, no milk. But anyway, it's like this attitude, like, why are they not doing it? And it was like this constant challenge that God was saying to me, whilst you've got an attitude, you jolly well get up and do it and make the tea and coffee. And I got up and I got up and I got up. And then one day I just thought to myself, no, I don't need to make tea and coffee today. I mean, I obviously made it sometime after that, but it was like my attitude had died. That thing inside, why should I? Why should I put the apron on? That sort of thing that rises up in us when we don't want to serve. And I think it was Bob Mumford's teaching many years ago. It's foundational teaching for me. You just keep doing it until you're no longer angry. Keep doing it. And then when the anger's gone, you've got the right to say, could one of you make tea and coffee today? But you have to earn the right. That's what Bob Mumford used to say. And it was very helpful teaching for me, who had a lot of attitude. Because God wants to do in our hearts what he did in Joseph's. He wants to start shifting us from the center of the universe to the edge. And that requires daily clothing ourselves with humility, putting on the apron strings. In prison, we find Joseph hearing a second set of dreams from the cupbearer and the baker. And he told them his dreams. They told him his dreams. And he said, do not all interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. And it's like he's almost there on the journey, but he's not quite. He's saying, don't all interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. There's sort of a half and half. He's not quite all there. He's on his journey. In fact, he tries to cut his journey short by saying to the cupbearer, please tell them all that I'm in prison for the wrong reason. Please get me out of here. But the cupbearer forgot him because God hadn't finished with working in Joseph's life yet. And God was moving him to the edge, but he's not quite at the edge. And actually, last time I spoke, a few weeks ago, I spoke about dreams a little bit. And I think I did exactly what Joseph did, because as I was writing this, I felt deeply convicted. Because I was talking to you about dreams, and I was saying, yeah, and some people come up to me and they tell me their dreams, and I pray, and I just thought, I just did what he's doing. I'm just so far from God being at the center of my life. It was a real challenge to me. But God is sharing the center of Joseph is sharing the center of his world at this time with God. And so God still has a little bit more to do, 2 more years to do, transforming his life, helping him to see that when God's at the center, things go well. So the blessing is on the edge. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. As I said at the beginning, humbling yourself is a 2-way thing. You are working at it, like me with the tea and coffee, but at the same time, God prunes us occasionally. Not all the time, but sometimes he does. And that's what God's mighty hand is here. And Pharaoh has a couple of dreams, and suddenly the cupbearer remembers Joseph. I suspect God thought, right, now's the time. Give Joseph the dreams, remind the cupbearer of Joseph. Give Pharaoh the dreams. I keep saying Joseph too many times, don't I? But you know what I meant. So they bring out Joseph, they shave him, they wash him, and they get him some new clothes. And here is the first time we realize Joseph's attitude has been transformed. Because if that was me, wouldn't you want to stay unshaven in order to show that you'd suffered? Wouldn't you want to stay dirty in order to say to Pharaoh, look at the state of your prisons, look at the state of me, no washing facilities? And wouldn't you want to wear your old clothes to show how long you'd been in prison? But no, Joseph's attitude was to honor Pharaoh, despite the fact that Pharaoh had some say in how these prisons were, to honor him and to get washed and clothe himself and present himself. He chose not to focus on himself, but to focus on what God had called him to do at the time. So we find Pharaoh saying to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said that you can hear a dream and you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. I cannot do it. It doesn't mean that Joseph's lost his skill in interpretation, nor has he lost his confidence or anointing. Through the journey, this difficult journey, Joseph has moved from the center of his universe and he's put God at the center. He's allowed God to take up residence on the throne. I cannot do it. Can you see this journey of being humbled under God's mighty hand? Can you see how he's daily clothing himself physically with a slave's apron? I just think surely he would have stood a better chance of getting out of prison if he'd said, yeah, it's my gifting. I can interpret dreams. You need me by your side, man. But he didn't say this. He said, I cannot do it. I cannot do it. But God will give you the answer. He has moved. He has put God at the center. He has found himself now in a palace, and he still is putting God at the center. And for God to use us, he has to move us from the center of our own worlds to the edge so that God sits on the throne. And every day I find myself at the center of my world. Every day it's like a daily thing. God, I put you on the throne. I put you back in the center. I've messed up. I've let it slip. I told them all at church I had something to do with interpreting dreams. I've done it wrong again, Lord. But put God back in the center. We have to just ask for forgiveness, get back in the center. But Peter tells us in verse 6 and verse 10 that he may exalt you at the proper time. Or verse 10, which is a little further on, the grace of the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. What had Joseph become? Strong, firm, and steadfast. And that's what, when we humble ourselves, when we take the low seat, that is what God does. He enables us to be strong, firm, and steadfast. And it may be possible that our reward is not until we get to heaven, but we will have a reward for this. We will have a reward when God is the center of his life. But we won't mind if the reward's in heaven, because if God's at the center of our lives, then it doesn't matter that God is coming first. And I just want to finish with this little verse in chapter 5, verse 7. It says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Now this is in the context of humility and being humble. It takes humility to give your anxiety to Jesus. It takes humility. And one of the reasons is because it's really hard to, when you're anxious, to stop looking at yourself and being self-focused and putting yourself on the throne. That's what happens with anxiety. We look more and more in on ourselves. And it's wonderful this, because he says, give God your anxiety because he cares for you. He cares about your future. He cared about the future of both Joseph and his whole family and each one of us, because each one of us are saved here today because Joseph was prepared to be humble. He's prepared to save his family, who are prepared to be a people called by God, where Jesus is able to save the whole world, anybody who accepts him. So he cares. He cares about the detail. He cared about the detail of Joseph in his prison experience. He cares. He really cares. And that's why we give him our anxiety, because he actually cares about the outcome of the thing you're being anxious about. And if we don't give it to him, we will be so busy focusing on ourselves that we won't be able to live in God's plan and find our freedom. You know, and when we put on our aprons of humility each day, you may need to put it on because you've got attitude like me, but you may also need to put it on because you're feeling anxious. And just say, I'm putting this apron on today because I know that you care about me and you care about what happens. And I want to take you off myself off the throne and put you back on the throne, because God really cares. And that's the heart of what I want to say today, that when God puts us through prison experiences, when it says humble yourself, it sounds tough. And when it says you're humbled under God's mighty hand, it sounds hard. But it is all because God has a bigger plan and a better plan. It's because he cares that we need to be doing this. Amen.